Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, November 9th. Today's day 34 since the attacks by Hamas on southern Israel and since the bombing campaign on Gaza began. I have some updates. In the past day or so, Netanyahu announced that Israel might not be leaving Gaza, but he seemed to indicate an openness to a longer military occupation of part, if not all, of the Gaza Strip, to which the United States and other Arab countries strongly disagree. And yesterday, Secretary Blinken announced that affirmative elements have to be taken in order to sustain peace. And he said that any action has to include the Palestinian people's voice and aspirations at the center of post-crisis governance in Gaza. He went on to say that Palestinian-led governance, this is like, it almost sounds like it doesn't make any sense. But essentially what Secretary Blinken was saying is the Palestinian Authority will have control of Gaza after all of this is over, and that the West Bank and Gaza have to be unified, which was a bit of a different articulation than what we've been hearing from the White House and what we've been hearing from the US government. According to the Washington Post, President Biden's administration has been able to negotiate 4-hour humanitarian pauses every day. It's interesting, the news has been reporting this, but what I've been reading is it's only in North Gaza, and North Gaza is where the ground incursion has been taking place by Israeli troops. So my understanding is that there has been no comprehensive humanitarian pause agreed to. And so we'll try to find more out about that and talk about that more tomorrow. Everything I've been reading is a 4-hour humanitarian pause only in North Gaza. And that's for the purpose of allowing remaining civilians in the north to be able to flee to the south. President Biden also told reporters that he's still trying to get Israel to negotiate towards a longer pause, targeting more than 3 days. And the purpose for that is to try to negotiate over the release of more hostages. There currently is a very large meeting of more than 50 nations that's being hosted in Europe by French President Macron. Today, he opened a Gaza aid conference where he made an appeal for Israel to protect all civilians, saying that all lives have equal worth. All lives have equal worth, that fighting terrorism can never be carried out without rules. And one of the goals of the conference is to address the besieged Palestinian enclave of Gaza's growing needs, including food, water, health supplies, electricity, and fuel. This morning, there was an article, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the content in this article that came out in AP News, reporting that the fabric of Gazans' tight-knit society is breaking down. We're starting to hear reports about fist fights in bread lines, residents waiting for hours to get a gallon of brackish water. That's water that has a bit of salt in it, which will still make them sick. Scabies, diarrhea, respiratory infections are starting to spread, which we knew would be the case. We've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks, that when you cut off water and there's not clean water supplies, waterborne illnesses spread. And some families are having to choose who in their family gets to eat. And so here is a quote from Susan Wahadi, an aid worker and mother of 5, who's staying at a UN shelter in Gaza. Hundreds of people are sharing a single toilet, and she says this: "My kids are crying because they're hungry, they're tired, and they can't use the bathroom, and I have nothing to give them." Some Palestinians have vented their anger against Hamas, shouting insults at officials or beating up a policeman. These are scenes that are unimaginable just a month ago, witnesses are reporting. Yusuf Hamash says, "Everywhere you go, you see tension in people's eyes." Yusuf is an aid worker with the Norwegian Refugee Council in Han Yunis. He says, "You can tell that people are just at a breaking point." Supermarket shelves are nearly empty. Bakeries have shut down because of lack of flour or fuel for ovens. Gaza's farmland is mostly inaccessible. There is little in produce markets beyond onions and oranges. Families cook lentils over small fires in the streets. Ahmad is a 28-year-old photographer at a shelter who says you hear children crying in the night for sweets or for hot food, and it's just impossible to sleep. Most people have gone weeks without meat, eggs, milk, and they're now living, many people, on only one meal a day. We know that Israel cut off the water from Gaza on the second day, October 8th, shortly after the Hamas attacks, saying that its complete siege would only be lifted once all of the more than 240 hostages are returned. We do know Israel has turned on pipelines to the center and south of Gaza, but there is still no fuel or electricity to pump or process the water, and so the taps have run dry. For those who can't find or afford bottled water, they rely on salty, unfiltered well water, which doctors say cause diarrhea and serious gastrointestinal infections. At shelters, the lack of water makes it hard to maintain basic hygiene. And a doctor there has said that lice and chickenpox have spread. On Wednesday morning alone, he treated 4 cases of meningitis. And this week, he has seen 20 cases of liver infection from hepatitis A. What worries me, he said, is that I know I'm seeing only a fraction of the number of cases here at the shelter. For most ailments, there's no treatment. Zinc tablets and oral rehydration salts vanished within a week of the war beginning. Frustrated patients have assaulted doctors who describe being beaten at times just because people are frustrated when they can't find their basic needs. So that, again, is from an AP report that things are starting to deteriorate in terms of the fabric of society. So that is a snapshot of what's happening in Gaza. I wanted to close by giving a brief summary of what's happened in terms of some of the protests around the world and in the United States, which are gaining steam here in the US, but also around the world. In the last couple of days, there have been some very specific protests, some here in Washington state, where pro-Palestinian demonstrators rallied at the port of Tacoma, specifically to block a military supply vessel that they believe are carrying weapons from the US to Israel. They fear any weaponry on board will be used in Israel's ongoing campaign in the Gaza Strip. Waving a Palestinian flag, they held signs saying, "Defend Gaza and free Palestine. Not another nickel, not another dime. No more money for Israel's crimes," end quote. In New York City, just today, pro-Palestinian protesters shut down the offices of the New York Times, saying that their reporting is one-sided and is not telling the whole story about what's happening in Gaza. Today was a national day of protests, and there were more than 500 actions across the country taken where people were walking out of their jobs or schools, calling for a ceasefire and an end to the blockade on Gaza. Today in Washington, D.C., dozens of advocates met. This was organized by a number of Catholic and Christian groups. Churches for Middle East Peace was one of the sponsoring organizations. And also we followed the lead of Franciscan Action Network, where people gathered to pray and to call for a ceasefire, calling for an end to the war at the Senate office buildings. A number of people also engaged in civil disobedience and were arrested, saying enough of this horrible war. I wanted to mention, we've not started to advertise this yet, but we're going to have a candlelight prayer vigil in Washington, D.C. at the White House or Lafayette Park. And we think it'll be at 6 p.m. Keep your eyes out at our website, www.cmep.org. But Monday, November 20th, in the evening at 6 p.m. in Washington, D.C., a candlelight prayer vigil calling for a ceasefire. And we would invite you to consider joining us for that if you're able. I wanted to close with the words of the presiding Bishop Michael Curry of the Episcopal Church. He wrote a powerful statement, and these are some of the words he said in it. "Staying quiet in this moment would be a stain on our souls that would deepen our complicity. U.S. leadership must tell Israel to stop bombing civilian areas and allow access for full humanitarian aid to flow freely into Gaza. Every human child of God, Palestinian and Israeli, deserve safety and security. We need to stop the killing today. Vengeance will not bring back the dead. Retaliation will not repair the harms and the hurt. We are called to love, even and especially when it seems impossible. We must stop the next 10,000 from being killed. He said, as Episcopalians, and I would say as Christians and as humans, we must call upon our leaders, President Biden, members of Congress, and others to be unequivocal that we need to stop the killing today. This is clearly what love demands of us.